everyone, welcome to this special show here on Headlines today on the 90th birthday of the former Prime Minister of the country, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who's got the perfect birthday present, many would say, with the announcement that he will receive the Bharat Ratna. That announcement doesn't really come as a surprise, not just because there is a BJP government in power, but it's also a reflection of the respect and adulation that Mr. Vajpayee has commanded. His detractors over the years have been those with ideological differences, never personal. Even his bitterest opponents accept that Mr. Vajpayee has been a remarkable parliamentarian, a politician who was a three-time Prime Minister, someone who stood for a particular kind of political integrity and who had a remarkable way with words, in prose and in verse. So let's start by taking a closer look at Atal Bihari Vajpayee, orator, poet, and a politician par excellence.
उन्नत मस्तक उभरा सीना पीड़ाओं में पलना होगा कदम मिलाकर चलना होगा जो कार्य हमने अपने हाथ में लिया है
Atal Bihari Vajpayee, thinker, poet, diplomat, Prime Minister, captivating orator,
जब कार्य पूरा हो गया तो हमने पहले भी दिखा दिया कि अगर हम शांति की साधना कर सकते हैं तो अपने हितों के लिए हम युद्ध भी कर सकते हैं
chin thrust out, right arm flung forward, stretching the pauses between phrases.
लेकिन आत्मविश्वास से भरा हुआ भारत और आत्मविश्वास से भरी हुई पार्टी, आत्मविश्वास से भरी हुई, न टायर न रिटायर,
tossing out words like confetti.
सत्ता का खेल तो चलेगा सरकारें आएंगी जाएंगी पार्टियां बनेगी बिगड़ेंगी मगर ये देश रहना चाहिए इस देश का लोकतंत्र अमर रहना चाहिए
When rhetoric is poetry, every word is a turn of phrase.
कुछ कांटों से सज्जित जीवन प्रखर प्यार से वंचित यौवन नीरवता से मुखरित मधुवन परहित अर्पित अपना तन मन जीवन को शत आहुति में जलना होगा गलना होगा कदम मिलाकर चलना
The din in parliament would die. India would listen speechless, mesmerized.
बार-बार इस चर्चा में एक स्वर जनाए सुनाई दिया है कि वाजपेयी तो अच्छा है मगर पार्टी ठीक है
Right man in the wrong party. That was almost a constant refrain all through his political life. But Atal Bihari Vajpayee never let that weigh him down. He was proud to be part of the Sangh Parivar, and yet he was able to rise above his political origins. He taught many the art of coalition and consensus politics.
The consensus man who steered a ragtag coalition for 6 years. The mascot who gave a national mandate to a party which was in the fringes for decades. A moderate who broke away from the hardline Hindutva constituency to chart a new course in coalition dharma. The only rightist with a pan-India appeal. A reassuring persona that glued disparate forces. After spending 4 decades in opposition, Atal Bihari Vajpayee took oath as the Prime Minister for the first time in 1996.
मैं अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी ईश्वर की शपथ लेता हूँ
But his coalition government was weak, and he lasted only 13 days as a Prime Minister. A dispirited Vajpayee gave a spirited speech in the parliament before throwing in the towel.
हम संख्या बल के सामने सर झुकाते हैं और आपको विश्वास दिलाते हैं कि जो कार्य हमने अपने हाथ में लिया है वो जब तक राष्ट्रीय उद्देश्य पूरा नहीं कर लेंगे तब तक विश्राम से नहीं बैठेंगे तब तक आराम से नहीं बैठेंगे अध्यक्ष महोदय मैं अपना त्यागपत्र राष्ट्रपति महोदय को देने जा रहा हूं
Atal Bihari's political career, like most politicians, was not without controversy. During the Gujarat riots, there were questions whether Mr. Vajpayee should have gone out of his way and sacked the then Chief Minister of Gujarat, Narendra Modi. As it turned out, Mr. Vajpayee did not do that. Exactly 2 years later, the UPA would defeat the NDA in the general elections. It was a surprise defeat suffered by the veteran politician. But even in defeat, Mr. Vajpayee was always gracious.
Some believe Vajpayee's greatest achievement was that he made India a nuclear weapon state in 1999. He himself never thought so. Pokhran too was necessitated by a peculiar non-proliferation treaty.
Today, at 15:45 hours, India conducted 3 underground nuclear tests in the Pokhran range.
He showed immense boldness in taking this step.
मुझे आश्चर्य है कि परमाणु परीक्षण की भी आलोचना की गई। पूछा गया देश के सामने कौन सा खतरा था। मैं 1974 में सदन में था, जब श्रीमती इंदिरा गांधी के नेतृत्व में परमाणु परीक्षण किया गया था। हमने उसका स्वागत किया था, प्रतिपक्ष में थे फिर भी स्वागत किया था, क्योंकि देश की रक्षा के लिए वो किया गया था। उस समय कौन सा खतरा था? क्या आत्मरक्षा की तैयारी तभी होगी जब खतरा होगा?
But it did not in any way reduce his commitment to the goal of a world without nuclear weapons.
In this Congress, you have often expressed concern about the future contours of Asia. Will it be an Asia that will be at peace with itself? Or will it be a continent where countries seek to redraw boundaries and settle claims, historical or imaginary, through force? We seek an Asia where power does not threaten stability and security. We do not want the domination of some to crowd out the space for others. We must create an Asia where cooperative rather than aggressive assertion of national self-interest defines behavior among nations.
He is often accused of pushing the subcontinent to the brink of a fourth war with Pakistan after the parliament attack. But the same Vajpayee invited Pakistan's General Musharraf, the architect of Kargil and Kandahar, to the Monument of Love in Agra and shook hands with him. But the BJP hawks were ready to frustrate his peace efforts, or his dream of the Peace Nobel, by bringing India and Pakistan together. History will remember him for the unilateral ceasefire on the line of control. His hand of friendship to Pakistan despite the betrayals and his efforts to give the healing touch to Kashmir. But Vajpayee remained a political paradox at home, ambivalent and with a penchant for pendulum swings on issues, the most stark being the Gujarat riots of 2002. More than 1,000 people died in some of the worst religious violence in decades. The riot followed an attack on a train in which 59 Hindu activists were killed. Many criticized the government for being slow to react, in particular because the state was also governed by the BJP. For some, it was a sign that BJP was unwilling to let go of its Hindu nationalist agenda.
If there is one enduring friendship in Indian political history, it is possibly the duo of Atal and L.K. Advani. In many ways, for years, they were the Jodi number one of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Every now and then, there would be reports of friction between the two, but the fact is, they were a team which will go down in contemporary history as possibly the most formidable political formation, the one that lifted the BJP into a position where they could aspire for power at the centre.
Atal Bihari Vajpayee announced his retirement from active politics exactly a year after his shock defeat in the general elections. With it, the career of one of India's most influential and charismatic politicians came to an end. Before the 2004 elections, few people expected him to fade so soon. It was too early to properly assess Vajpayee's achievements. But there are many who would agree with his own verdict. Regardless of the circumstance of Bharatiya Janata Party's shock defeat, history will remember Atal Bihari Vajpayee as one of India's finest prime ministers. The jury is still out on who is the best prime minister India has had so far. Atal Bihari Vajpayee could have been so had he displayed greater firmness and foresight in stemming the Gujarat carnage. Contrary to reports, his rivalry with L.K. Advani, his most senior colleague, has only great respect for Vajpayee.
First time that I met him when he was traveling along with Vajpayee, along with Dr. Mukherjee. But my closeness to him continued for all the years. Even when Vajpayee ji was the Prime Minister, he would, anyone who went to him, whether it was in respect of some matter in the government or something relating to the party, he would invariably ask him, you must meet Advani, and ask him also his view. That kind of close bond between us and close trust between us continued all through.
Let's take a break. When we return, we'll look at those who inspired Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who were his mentors and who shaped his political leanings. Much more on this special on Bharat Ratna Vajpayee. When Atal Bihari Vajpayee became Prime Minister for the first time in 1996, many in India discovered that he was a poet too. It was a fact that was not much known outside the Hindi heartland at the time. If there was one thing that set him apart from his contemporaries, it was his oratory. It had substance, style and panache. His was the pause that made India await the next gem that would continue the oratorial flow. His were the speeches that made the din in Parliament die down. His were the thoughts that would sustain support for the BJP in its years in power. So who shaped the man who is arguably the best orator Indian Parliament has seen? Who influenced him and what drove him to achieve what he finally did?
Atal Bihari Vajpayee was born to a high-class Brahmin family in Madhya Pradesh in 1926. As a teenager, he was jailed briefly for opposing British colonial rule, but played no major part in the freedom movement. He flirted with communism before choosing to support the RSS and the Jan Sangh. He dropped out of law school to run an RSS magazine in the early 1950s. Jan Sangh's leader Shyama Prasad Mukherjee became a big influence in his life. In 1957, Vajpayee was elected to the Lok Sabha for the first time. His oratorial skills so impressed the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru that he predicted that Vajpayee would someday become India's Prime Minister.
गाने की साजिश करने वालों से कह दो चिनगारी का खेल बुरा होता है, औरों के घर आग लगाने का जो सपना वह अपने ही घर में सदा खड़ा हो.
Soon Atal Bihari Vajpayee became the face of Jana Sangh after Deen Dayal Upadhyaya's death. 1977 would be a landmark year, heeding the call of social reformer Jayaprakash Narayan for all opposition parties to unite against the Congress. Vajpayee would merge Jan Sangh into the newly formed Grand Alliance, the Janata Party. The same year, following the general elections, he became the Minister for External Affairs in Prime Minister Morarji Desai's cabinet. The same year, he would become the first person to deliver a speech to the United Nations General Assembly in Hindi.
जहाँ तक भारत का संबंध है, हमने ये बात बार बार स्पष्ट की है कि हम युद्ध नहीं चाहते.
By the time the Janata government crumbled in 1979, Vajpayee had established himself as an experienced statesman and a respected political leader.
अमेरिकी शस्त्रों से अपनी आजादी को दुनिया में कायम रख लोगे यह मत समझो. 10-20 अरब डॉलर लेकर आने वाली बर्बादी से तुम बच लोगे ये मत समझो. धमकी जिहाद के नारों से, हथियारों से कश्मीर कभी हथियार लोगे ये मत समझो. हमलों से, अत्याचारों से, संहारों से भारत का शीश झुका लोगे यह मत समझो.
As the Janata Party crumbled after Morarji Desai's resignation as the Prime Minister, Vajpayee joined many of his Bharatiya Janasangh and Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh colleagues to form the Bharatiya Janata Party in 1980. In the 1984 elections, BJP got only 2 seats in the parliament, but Vajpayee rose to become the leader of the opposition. Victory in the assembly elections in Gujarat and Maharashtra in March 1995 and a good performance in the elections of Karnataka Assembly in December 1994 propelled the BJP to greater political prominence. A lack of powerful majority hampered his second stint in power from 1998. His government collapsed after J. Jayalalitha withdrew her party's support from the coalition. On 13th October 1999, the Bharatiya Janata Party-led NDA came back to power, riding on a massive wave of popularity due to a victory in the Kargil War. It was an opportunity for Vajpayee to lead a more stable coalition this time. But his third term lasted the full course. It was for the first time a multi-party coalition could do that. And also, the first time since independence, a non-Congress party-led government had completed its term. Vajpayee's successful steering of an unwieldy coalition was his biggest achievement. To win the backing of more secular groups, he had to abandon some of the cornerstones of BJP policy. These had included scrapping special autonomy for Kashmir, building a Hindu temple on site of the Ayodhya Mosque, and abolishing India's separate civil code for India's Muslims. During Vajpayee's tenure, the 30 crore strong middle classes were delighted at the economic growth and the reform programs achieved under the BJP. India became an emerging power in information technology, business process outsourcing, and biotechnology. Kargil War notwithstanding, Vajpayee's personal mission to improve relations with Pakistan was also acknowledged as the most genuine by an Indian Prime Minister. His personal integrity has never been questioned, but arms bribery scandals have exposed corruption in his government and cast doubt on his judgment. His critics also called him the mask, terming his gentle smile of moderation hid his party's extremist stand. The Bharatiya Janata Party was also not sure of Vajpayee's liberal economic policies, which opened India's economy and brought the country closer to the West. L.K. Advani and most BJP politicians supported the 1992 Babri Masjid destruction, but Vajpayee condemned the attack. Was he, the right man, stuck with the wrong party?
हार नहीं मानूंगा, रार नहीं ठानूंगा, काल के कपाल पर लिखता मिटाता हूँ, गीत नया गाता हूँ, गीत नया गाता हूँ.